Hello, everyone. It is another Skoden Talks with the Homies. Excited, excited, excited. It's a lovely, lovely rainy day here in Oklahoma. Come on in, come on in. Hopefully, everyone is doing okay. Hopefully, everybody had some good Easter since we've seen you last. Everybody's spring dances is about to start. I'm excited. The Shawnees are about to start dancing, so I'll be sure to pray a little extra hard for y'all. And dance just maybe one or two. I'm still recovering from surgery, so. But as everyone comes in, I'm going to go ahead and do my little introduction as we're waiting for our special guest. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Skoden Talks with the Homies with your host, Auntie Sage. IP3 is an organization that provides nonviolent direction action training, campaign strategy, and community organizing tools to support indigenous communities taking action in defense of their homelands. For more information about IP3 or to send community training requests, you can visit the website at ip3action.org or contact info@ip3action.org. And I believe our guest is here. Come on in, come on in, come on in. Wave to all of our lovely, lovely folks today. Well, hello,
What's
Mr.
up?
Ian.
How's it going?
Wonderful. Let me adjust. There we go. All right. And as always, guests, if you have any questions during the interview, just go ahead and comment and we will try to get them answered as we go along. So, Ian, it is your floor. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Chugma, Sahos Chufua, Chula Ulali, Ba, Ian McCants, Oklahoma City Ako, Amintili, Chickasaw Micha, Chata Igyoko Saya, Ishta Onchololi, George Micha Luisa Yates, Tatums Ako. Hi, my name's Ian McCants, or Laughing Fox in Chickasaw. I'm from Oklahoma City. I am a Chickasaw and Choctaw Freedmen, and I come from George and Louisa Yates from Tatums, Oklahoma, which is in the Chickasaw Nation.
Awesome, awesome. Chickasaw and Choctaw in the house today, folks. All right. Could you share about the people, places, and the things that have influenced you as a person?
Yes, I was born in Norman, raised in Oklahoma City. My grandmother raised me mostly. She did an amazing job. She had a huge influence on my life. And growing up in Oklahoma around the 39 tribes that live there in my home, heavily influenced me as a child. And growing up and reconnecting with my dad's side of the family, they're Chickasaw and Choctaw Freedmen, and spending time with them in the nation in Ardmore. And one of my cousins is with us now. Has definitely played a huge impact on my life and the trajectory of like the things that I want to do and think are possible. So,
He snuck in there, Creek, too.
yeah.
I got some Creek, some Muskogees in the house, too. All right. Could you tell us more about the community of Tatums?
Yes. So Tatums is a community that was founded in the 18, I'm not sure on the date. I want to say later 18, after the 1860s. My family members, who are who are Chickasaw Freedmen, the Franklins, were enslaved on the bottom of the Red River near Bernieville, and then after the Civil War, they made their way up north and settled around the Wild Horse Creek, and a lot of people from that part of Oklahoma just call like the wider community of where Tatums is Wild Horse, and they founded a town there called Homer, and that was like the predecessor to Tatums. And then with the end of slavery in Indian Territory and in the South, there was a large migration of Black folks from the United States who made their way to Indian Territory. And so Tatum's was a collaboration between Black folks from the US and freedmen who had already been living in the area. And that's something that you see with a lot of all Black towns, is that like they're situated in areas where there were already freedmen communities, with like in the Creek Nation, in the Chickasaw Nation, the Choctaw Nation, and Cherokee Nation.
Wow. I did not know about that.
Hmm.
Wow, I'm gonna have to visit. And like recently, I did not know the Choctaw had stomp dance. I'm a big stomp dancer, so
Yeah,
I had
Chickasaw Choctaw.
learned. I guess there's like a historical stomp ground
Hmm.
down
And
down south.
there's outside of Okmulgee, yeah, Okmulgee, there's Grayson, Oklahoma is an all Black town founded by Creek Freedmen. And it's like 30 minutes outside of Okmulgee where, Res Rocks is filmed and everything.
Wow, the more you know.
The more you
Um,
know.
for folks who may be unaware, who are the Freedmen? What is the role with Oklahoma Freedmen Collective?
Yes. So the freedmen are people of African descent who have historically lived in the Southeastern nations. There's obviously a lot more that goes into that, but that is like the general example, and that took place in a lot of different ways. A lot of people think that all freedmen descendants are come from people who were formerly enslaved by the tribes, and while for a majority of people that is true, there were free people of color living within the Chickasaw Nation, the Creek Nation, the Cherokee Nation, the Choctaw Nation, and those people's descendants were enrolled as freedmen, as well as Seminole freedmen, who we know were not enslaved. And part of the treaty that removed them to Oklahoma had the Justice Proclamation, which was the first federal law that ended slavery within what would become the United States, and that made Seminole freedmen free people when they went to Indian Territory. And so like the people often say like that freedmen means that all people's ancestors were enslaved. No, it just means that these are people of African descent who lived in these nations historically and continue to for the most part.
Cool, cool. Yeah, for the longest time growing up, I had always heard about it, and I was
Mm-hmm.
like, man, what a time that would have been living back then and getting to mix both the cultures and learning a new part of how to mix that and how those dances were back then. I mean,
Yeah.
that had to been like some big
Mm-hmm.
dances.
And there are stories that the Creek Freedmen have of like going to stomp towns. There are a lot of Creek Freedmen who didn't just speak Muskogee, who also spoke Hitchiti and other like languages. They're in the Muskogee Confederacy. And so like obviously like having that level of cultural knowledge, like these people were a part of these communities and have been historically. And then
Awesome.
too, like there's so many words even. For example, like the word for okra in Chickasaw combo comes from an Angolan word and, for okra as well. So it's like that
Oh,
that tradition and that like knowledge is something that has been shared and is even in the language. So
oh, awesome. What is your role with the Oklahoma Freedmen Collective?
yeah, so the Oklahoma Freedmen Collective is like a digital space for freedmen to learn more about their history and culture. So we do a lot of educational talks like this where we talk about like the history of freedmen in Indian Territory. And just there's this like it's growing up in Oklahoma. I remember when I was in the fourth grade and Oklahoma turned 100, and like my grandmother knew her grandfather, who was not born a citizen of the United States because he was born in Indian Territory before statehood. And so like it's sad to see like the loss of knowledge in between then and now that has happened, but like folks are still so close to the culture to where like when we have these talks and like just talk about like just like very small things about culture people pick up on immediately, and like it's still there, and so like revitalizing that is the goal of Oklahoma Freedmen Collective, and like building community for people because there is like such a large diaspora of people who've left Oklahoma through statehood, through the Dust Bowl, through depression, and so like there's a large community of Southeastern natives on the West Coast, in California, and Freedmen as well. And so like making sure that those people at least have like some access to community, I think is really important. So.
Very, very important. Only way I can relate to that is like with my grandparents. They have lost theirs on my dad's side. Them being in the boarding school, they have lost a lot of um, their culture, their language, their traditions, just by going to boarding school and being taught that it was bad to learn that. And I feel like that would be something to tap into along the way, along those lines, to where it's like hopefully we can reconnect. Because like on my dad's side, I have no clue.
Yeah.
My Sioux or my Sioux, Punk, and Oto side. So that's very cool that y'all are connecting those dots and reconnecting people with that.
And it's like
Um,
elders play such an important role in that because we interviewed one of our elders in our community who passed recently, Lonsetta Bruce. She was a Chickasaw Freedman who lived in California, but her father was a first language speaker of Chickasaw. And so, like, having a conversation with someone whose father was his first language speaker and like hearing the knowledge that she was able to share and having that documented was really important because a lot of the times people will say that like freedmen were not a part of the culture or didn't participate in these things and didn't have like a deep knowledge of Southeastern culture and history that they belong to.
yeah.
And so like having that recorded is super important when those folks are passing on.
Wow. Um, Also, to our guests, I'm going to leave it open. If y'all have any questions for Ian or myself or anything that we're talking about, leave them in the comments and we'll get them answered.
We sure will.
Um, how has your personal history and your work with Freedmen Collective impacted your studies as an anthropology student?
Yeah, so when I first went to college, was not studying anthropology, and I met someone who was really impactful in making that change for me. Brooklyn Spotted Eagle, who's still a really good friend of mine, who was an anthropology student, getting her doctorate and studying Dakota women's societies, and so like seeing that there was a way to gather knowledge from indigenous people and have that knowledge remain within our communities and something that is something that we hold in control is the lesson that I found really empowering and made me want to study anthropology more. And so like just having like that understanding of culture and where the things we do come from is super important because like not everyone has that like knowledge of self. I think that's like a part of colonization, a part of statehood. And so like a part of my work is like undoing that. And so like just like another small example is like there's a war name that is like a nickname for Chickasaw men, a lot of the times Cubby. And like I have so many cousins and relatives nicknamed Cubby and they have no idea where it comes from. So like just bringing that knowledge back to people who already have like the culture is important. And so that's what made me want to study Chickasaw and understand like how things have changed and still remained at the same time.
That is awesome. I kind of think I heard that name, Brooklyn, over the weekend, but we'll chit chat after this. Um, what can you share about the recent trial regarding Muskogee Creek Nation freedmen?
Um, from a historical perspective, I think I have a better understanding of it more than what's happening now. And I think that's something that more people should like look to when they're looking to this issue because a lot of the things I've heard said about the Creek Freedmen just aren't accurate. And so, especially when it comes to the Creek Nation, which is different from the Southeastern tribes, like the history of freedmen in all nations is different. Like there are different treaties um, that governed how those relationships looked. And in the Creek Nation, there were three Creek tribal towns, and freedmen had representation in the Creek government. And so long, long before there was a person of African descent that was on the Supreme Court in the United States, there was a person of African descent, a Creek freedman named Jesse Franklin, who was on the Supreme Court in the Creek Nation. And so like this was a nation who welcomed people of African descent as citizens. They were adopted as citizens and had representation in tribal towns as citizens. And the thing that I think people misconstrue a lot of times when they see freedmen and the fact that freedmen were not given a blood quantum is that they think that that means that those people don't have blood ties to the nation, and that's not something that is true. I think when you look at how tribal towns were constructed in the Creek Nation, when you look at the clan system and how Southeastern people are traditionally people of matrilineal descent, it makes more sense because I've pulled up some cases here that I think are really important. And one of them was a Supreme Court case out of Oklahoma called Miller versus Allen, and it had to do with a woman who was enrolled as a Creek freedman. She was three-fourths Creek by blood. Her father was full-blood Creek. He was a part of this Tuskegee tribal town, and her mother was half Black and half Creek. And her mother's mother was also of African descent. And so in circumstances like this, where you had someone who was Creek who would marry someone of African descent, and the woman was a part of a tribal town. I think have it right here. Actually, she was a part of North Fork tribal town. So if this woman was a part of North Fork tribal town, she married a man who was a full-blood Creek. They had children. Those children are obviously Creek by blood, but because their mother was enrolled in North Fork tribal town, her children were also enrolled in North Fork tribal town and enrolled as Creek Freedmen. And during the Dawes Commission in the 1890s, this wasn't something that was a determinant of identity, because Creek Freedmen were citizens of the Creek Nation, were also allotted the same amount of land that Creek citizens were. And so this did not mean that these people were not Creek or that they were not Creek by blood. It simply meant that they were of African descent and they had a matrilineal descent from a tribal town that was made up of people of African descent. And when you look at the Creek Nation, historically being a confederacy made up of different Southeastern people, and the fact that these people were adopted into this confederacy the same way that other tribal towns were, there's no difference in how they were treated by the nation before statehood. And I think that statehood has a lot to do with the issues we see now in Oklahoma. When it comes to the relations between freedmen and citizens of the tribe, because when Oklahoma became a state, Jim Crow was the first law that was passed. And so people who were of African descent, regardless of if they were enrolled on the by blood roll and did have African ancestry, if they were enrolled as freedmen, or if they were Black people from the United States, they were all legally treated the same as second-class citizens of the United States. And non-Black Native people were legally declared white, which meant under the laws of Oklahoma, Native people who were non-Black and Afro-Indigenous people could not go into business together, could not marry each other, and could not live together. And so I think that is where you see like the breakdown in like the relations that Southeastern people had before statehood, when you have a government that is subsuming your government and then enforcing a new social order.
Oklahoma has came a long way.
I went
couldn't
home
even
to Oklahoma City in February, and I was like, oh my gosh, all these apartments, like, look at this, what is going on?
Even the tribal towns, like even when I went and took a visit the Chickasaw dances, I was like, oh, I was like, we have came up. I haven't been down to the Choctaw Festival in a while, so I'm gonna have
I
to
went to
visit.
Durant when I was home a year ago in January, and it was really nice.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to come visit because the last time I went, the food was amazing, the powwow was good, just everything.
The food at the cafe in Durant was
And
really good. People are gonna get me. I said Durant. I said it right.
and truth be told, the Choctaws have some very handsome men. Sorry, Chickasaw. What is the cultural significance of your work that is important for the greater public to know?
I think the cultural significance of my work, like going back to when Oklahoma turned 100 and I was in the fourth grade, it's just like there was like such, not only did we like sing all these songs about like colonization pretty much, but like just like the history we learned made it seem like the lives of people on this land didn't begin until 1907. And that's couldn't be further from the truth. Like our ancestors who lived in Indian Territory had lives that were very full and very complicated and had their own order to them that is different than the lives we live now. And I think that living in the United States and not having that knowledge of self of like where we come from in Indian Territory, it really limits our imagination and what we think is possible. And that's how I felt as a kid. Like I didn't really see myself in any of the celebration of the Oklahoma Centennial, yet my ancestors had been in Oklahoma since the 1840s, long before Oklahoma had been a state, and this place had been their home. And my ancestors actually signed the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit and the Treaty of Pontotoc that removed the Chickasaws and Choctaws to Oklahoma. And so like just none of that knowledge or history being in the forefront of the land that we live on, that we raise our families on, that our communities are in, is definitely a problem. And so I think that my work and the work of all people who descend from Indian territories, making sure that we know that history and that we take ownership and responsibility of being good stewards to like the knowledge of our communities and the knowledge that we had of the land that we're on.
Awesome, awesome. I was like, I guess scarred from reenacting the land run when I was in
Oh
school.
yeah, the land. Thankfully, we didn't have a land run reenactment, but they happen far, far too often.
And, well, we did, and the funny thing is, when I got my little family, it was a husband, wife, and a child. I told my partner that I wanted to be the wife, and she's like, "Well, I want to be the dad." So I was like, "Cool, it works out." And so we like did our little land run thing, and then afterwards, she was like, "You're still my wife," and I was like, "That was just for that little thing." She's like, "No, we're
It's
together."
over.
Like, I was like, "Calm down,
One
colonizer." Just kidding.
is the house and the prairie.
And this was just a game. We are not doing this in real life. um, how does anti-Black tribal law impact non-Black Indigenous members?
Very great question. I think that like when you look at the history of the Freedmen, there's like no separating it from the history of Southeastern people in general. And by doing that, you're missing out on a large chunk of your own history. Like there's no way that you can talk about the treaties of 1866 without talking about enslavement, because the second article of the treaty was dealing with enslavement. And that's a very important point too, is that the descendants of freedmen, their freedom did not come from the Emancipation Proclamation like it did for Black folks that lived in the United States. My ancestors weren't freed by laws passed in the United States to end slavery, because Indian Territory was not a part of the United States. And so my ancestors' freedom came from the treaties that the Chickasaw Nation signed with the U.S. government in 1866, actually a year after slavery ended in the United States, to end slavery. And in the Creek Nation, there was a similar article 2, that ended slavery in the Creek Nation, and then also declared citizenship to the descendants of freedmen and freedmen by treaty. And I think that's another point that's missing too, is that when we talk about the disenrollment of freedmen, people talk about the rights of sovereign tribes to make decisions when it comes to citizenship, which is 100% true. But the decision that the Creek Nation had already been made in 1866. They made the sovereign decision to adopt these people and their descendants in perpetuity by treaty. And so that's not something that you can just change your mind about. And also, when we think about the Dawes enrollment, when we think about allotment, Creek Freedmen by themselves, and we're not counting freedmen in the Cherokee Nation, the Seminole Nation, Choctaw Nation, Chickasaw Nation, just Creek Freedmen alone were allotted 1,089,440 plus acres of land.
Wow.
Freedmen in Oklahoma were the largest Black landowners in the entire United States. And so one thing that my cousin Buck Colbert Franklin, who was a Chickasaw and Choctaw Freedman, and he lived in the Creek Nation and tried to go in business with a business partner and friend of his who was Creek, but wasn't able to because of the state of Oklahoma. He was a lawyer during the early days of statehood, and he dealt with a lot of cases of people's land allotments being taken because there were no protections on land allotments given to freedmen. And so a lot of the times those land allotments were stolen, and you had people, again, who were 3/4 Creek and 1/4 Black who were enrolled as Creek freedmen, and they had no protection on their land allotments, and that land was stolen. And so to say that you care about the land of the Creek Nation or the Cherokee Nation or the Choctaw Nation, but you don't care about the rights of freedmen who were also allotted land in your nation, whose families have held onto that land and whose families are struggling to hold on that land, partially because even in the year 2023, when the Stigler Act was amended to remove blood quantum restrictions, because previously, in order for land allotments to be restricted from sale, there had to be a blood quantum restriction. I believe it was like 1/2, and then that was struck down to eliminate the blood quantum maximum or the blood quantum minimum. However, freedmen still aren't considered under the Stigler Act because they were never getting the blood quantum to begin with. And that's something that still happens. And so to say that you care about protecting Creek land when Freedmen have no legal recourse to protect our land allotments, partially because we're not citizens. It's hurting you as well as us.
Does the Chickasaws or Choctaws, under your knowledge, do they have like anything if they were to figure or were trying to figure out their ancestry? Is there anything they can go to with the tribe to see if their family was a
Yes, and
descendant?
that's the thing too. I think a lot of people don't understand, which kind of befuddles my mind, is the fact that like the same role that the freedmen are enrolled under is the same role that citizens of the nation, their ancestors, are enrolled under. There's no difference. So when someone in the nation goes to enroll, they're going to look at the Dawes roll, which is the same role that freedmen are on. There's a separate role of by blood for people who are by blood citizens, and a separate role for freedmen, people of African descent, but it's the same role. And so people a lot of the times are like, well, how are we going to know who these freedmen even are? It's 2023, and it's just like, well, how do you know who are citizens of your nation? It's the same process,
Yeah.
it's the same role, and you have to trace back your ancestry through birth records to those people, which is something that freedmen are able to do as well as by blood citizens of the nation. And so for freedmen that are wondering who their ancestors are, you simply just have to look back at your family history to before Oklahoma Statehood. And if your family members lived in Oklahoma Statehood and they're on the Dawes roll, then you then have access to that information. It is a wealth of information because something that the freedmen rolls and the nation provide isn't just the name of your ancestor who was alive in the 1890s, but also who your ancestor was enslaved to and who their mother and father were and who their mother and father were enslaved to. And so you had people in the 1890s who were in their 90s, in their 80s, who had lived in the nations prior to removal in Alabama or Mississippi or North Carolina or Tennessee, and were still alive. And so you have information about them as well as their parents. And I think that something that we don't consider too about our ancestors who lived during the time of statehood and who lived in Indian territory is all the things that these people had seen. Like there were people alive during the Civil War, during statehood, who had survived the Trail of Tears, who had survived the Civil War, and who had survived Oklahoma statehood and land allotment. And so like to think about our ancestors in that way, I think we have to have like a real reverence and honor for them to have been through such huge shifts in culture and to still maintain what they maintain to be able to pass on to us.
Cool, cool. Well, to switch gears, to get us all out of our serious questions, one question I do like to ask is, what is one of your favorite native dishes you like to treat yourself to when you're in Oklahoma or wherever you like to
Ooh.
travel?
I have a sweet tooth, so I really like walakshi, great dumplings.
Mm-hmm.
hmm Really good with a little vanilla ice cream. Um,
Uh,
Pashofa is also a classic. Yeah, with some smoked turkey neck bones and maybe a little
oh,
hickory nut. Yes,
oh my God.
yes.
My Choctaw friend made that for me, and I was like, I've had hominy before. He's like, you have not had it how we make it. And I was like, okay. And so I had me like maybe 4 bowls. Like
Yeah, it's so good.
Pashofa, I was like, oh my gosh, that hit the spot.
And that's the
What do you like to do
thing,
for?
like food too is like something that I can like instantly talk to my relatives from the country about. Including my cousin, his mother is one of my favorite people, and like we all just have like great conversations about food, about Pashofa, and she remembers her family members like beating the corn and the kitty and the mortar and pestle when she was younger. So it's
What
like
is
those
the one
memories are
called
there.
where it's like the little? It looked like little tamales.
Oh, Banaha.
Yes, banaha. Oh,
Yeah.
another one of my
With
favorites.
beans. Yeah, it's
Oh
really good.
yes.
hmm
What do you like to do for fun?
I bead. That's where my earrings at.
Oh,
Yes, I'm a beader. I like to garden too. There's a community of Pacific Northwest Chickasaws and Choctaws. I live in Seattle, Washington, and we get together and do different cultural
wow.
events. We make feather capes. We're planning on gardening. This is some of my earrings. So
Those are pretty
that's what I get up to. I'm
good.
also a bartender here in Seattle, so that keeps me pretty busy, and a union organizer as well at my job.
Uh,
So.
I love Seattle. Just beautiful town, beautiful people. The
Hmm.
natives are different from Oklahoma, but
Very different, yeah.
I just like being around them and learning
Hmm.
their cultures. I have a brother up there. I think he's
Suquamish.
Skokomish, something like that. But very different, a lot of
Hmm.
different. Because he he was like, "We're gonna go on the other side of the Mount Rainier," and it was like the desert side. I was like, "Where would
Oh
you take
yeah,
me?"
I
Like,
remember I went down to Yakima,
yeah.
and I won. This is the first time I ever really won something at the casino. I won $300 at their casino, and I went to their powwow and spent it all. It was such a good time.
Yeah, I went there and there was like fruit uh fruit gardens and stuff, and I was like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, this is not the pretty side. The west side's the
Hmm.
pretty side. So, and then when we went through Mount Rainier, I was like, oh my gosh, so beautiful.
Oh yeah, the
Uh,
Snoqualmie Pass.
oh,
It's really pretty.
I was like, I'm in heaven.
Great places
Just
to hike.
eagles everywhere. I was like, oh my
Hmm.
God, I was actually just crying. I was like, we've got like one eagle to a lake here in
And
Oklahoma.
the views, we're not getting views like that in Oklahoma. It's
No.
so flat. You can see a town from 12 miles away.
Yeah. I was like, and then they're like, "Do you want to go home?" I was like, "No, I do not." But, what song is giving you life right now?
What song is giving me life right now? Ooh. What song is giving me life right now? I've been like listening to a lot of breakup music lately, so it's been a lot of R&B. And then like when I'm like, I gotta snap out of this, some Meg The Stallion to put my head in the right mindset. Yeah.
I have those. I'm a drag performer, so some of those nights I'm like, you know what? We're gonna make the children cry.
And that's the like it's so interesting because like there's so many places I've lived when I was younger. I went to college in Atlanta, and then moved to Seattle in like 2017. And like I just wasn't of age to enjoy cities like I could have. And now that I'm 26 now, and now that I am, it's just like going back to Oklahoma. Like the most I ever went out there was like going to the rec room when I was underage.
Oh no, not the rec room.
the rec room. So it's like I've got to go out and like actually experience OKC and Tulsa too.
Oh, that it has changed for the better. Let's just
Mhm.
say that. And it looks a lot better too. The rec room is shut down, but it has changed a lot. Looks a lot better. Um, what is in the dreamscape that you hope to manifest personally and or professionally?
Ooh, and the dreamscape. I would like to eventually move back to Oklahoma. It's something that like I know in the back of my head I'm going to move home. And so just like making sure that I've seen the things that I want to see and am in a good space to move home and be in community with my family. Want to get my degree. Um, Considering getting my doctorate, but I'm like, oh, I don't know. And just teaching because I think that there are a lack of people who are Southeastern natives teaching Southeastern history in general, and especially when it comes to Freedmen. Um, our history is like not very well known, and I feel like a lot of the times in academia it gets exploited. And there are people who have made several large bags off of our history and contribute nothing back to the community and don't even care or put effort into making sure that the things that they discover about the communities they're writing about, that those communities actually are aware of that information. That's a huge problem for me.
Uh,
So
Especially how they're trying to erase our history in the textbooks right now. How our
yes,
government is trying to
yeah,
block
ban
any of
books
that.
and
Oh
ban the
yeah.
history of Indian territory. I think I think it's all just very telling about the state of Oklahoma. And sometimes I'm just like, you really disestablish 39 tribal governments for the state of Oklahoma's government. Like, this is the worst government of them all. So I'm just like, yeah, land back on that one.
Land back all the
Land back
way.
on that one. Like the fact that the state of Oklahoma has spent over $10 million fighting tribal governments in court from the McGirt decision
And
and just
still trying.
still
Oh,
trying.
our lovely, well, not my governor, Oklahoma's governor, but
Hmm.
uh, poor thing, poor thing. Do you have any advice for how folks can get involved? How can we uplift your work?
Yes, definitely check out the Oklahoma Freedmen Collective. I think it's really important to like read about the history of freedmen and to also read about the history of your ancestors and where your ancestors lived and the communities they come from. And I think that when you do that, you're going to find that there's not this huge gap that a lot of people are trying to make it seem like the narrative that's out about the freedmen and their history and their relation to Southeastern Native people. And for people that are freedmen that are interested in learning more about their history, I think that you really have to put in the work and the effort to read up about Southeastern Native history and to read up on freedmen history, because knowing both is equally as important. And also like being in community, like I have more cousins than I can count, and I always know that like regardless of um regardless of how it's a lot of different people have different reasons for why they can't connect with their community. But I think that when you look at your relations and your relatives from a broader sense, like I'm a lot closer with some of my six cousins than I am some of my immediate family, and those relationships are really nurturing to me. And those people are just as much my kin and my relatives, and have taught me so much about our history and culture. So not just limiting yourself to your immediate family, but like realizing that you come from a large community of people and that you couldn't be here had that community of people not supported you, supported your ancestors and supported each other so that you all could make it to that space. So.
And anyway, they're just our brothers and sisters. So I'm
Yeah.
just like, I got a
Hmm.
shitload of
That's my
them.
uncle and my auntie. Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to highlight or plug before we go?
I may be dropping at Etsy soon for my bead work, so check that out. What I do, yeah.
I mean, that is some good beat where I like it. It was
Mhm.
really tight.
The
I like
mirror,
it.
the mirror one, my fave. Yeah.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our interview. Thank you again, Ian, for coming and stop and talk to Skoden
No
Talks with the Homies.
problem.
I am your host, Sage Chanel, Auntie Sage, and we will catch y'all next time. Take care, and we will see you in a few weeks.
Peace, love,